I'm Murray Bryant. I'm a professor emeritus from Western University, the Ivy School of Business. I was at the Ivy School of Business from 1988 to 2016. And prior to that, I was from 1979 to 88 at the Rotman School at the University of Toronto. So during the time I was at Ivy, I wrote in excess of 70 cases. I haven't kept track. 70 cases, and all of those I think had teaching notes and some were industry notes. My latest case, which is the subject of today, is a case with a professor from the Schulich School of Business at York University. It is really on FIFA and the challenges facing professional soccer, or as the Europeans say, football. The case is set in 2025, and the reason for that is in 2026, the World Cup for soccer is going to be played in the United States. And a requirement by FIFA of the United States in order to bid for the games was that they had to have a professional soccer league, Major League Soccer, FIFA. FIFA is a huge money generator that comes out in the case. And they do this by organizing global tournaments like the Men and Women's World Cup, the Under-17 World Cup, the Under-19 World Cup, the World Club Championship. They generate lots of money. And the only members of FIFA are national federations. So, Soccer Canada, English soccer, French soccer, not the leagues or not the clubs. And there's 211 national federations that form FIFA. And FIFA's model is interesting because they generate all this money and then they pass it back to national federations, not based on need, but based on basically how they can keep these national federations voting for them. In business school, we teach the Porter model of the 5 forces of competition. We teach resource dependency theory. But sports is not like that. Sports is the ultimate perfect competition, because Porter argued that the way to succeed is to either differentiate or be a low-cost producer. Sports, the basis of professional sports is the league. And the league constructs rules so as to permit 2 things to happen, to enable on any given game day perfect competition between 2 teams. They do this in 2 ways. They do this what they call uncertainty of outcome. If you have a dominant team in a sport, the fans will get tired and not attend. The sponsors will get tired. The media will get tired because there's no story there. The story is the perfect competition of Chelsea playing Manchester United, and the fans there, the roughly 80,000 fans, want an outcome which is uncertain. The second thing that leagues do, so the leagues organize competition. The leagues also do what they call balancing. And this is a difference between North American sports such as the NHL, if we're Canadian, or the NFL, if we're American. Each of those franchises. For example, the Maple Leafs and Chicago have a guaranteed franchise. And the NFL probably does the best job of this by ensuring revenue sharing and implicitly salary caps. But if a group of entrepreneurs wanted to start an NHL team in Hamilton, they couldn't because Maple Leafs have the franchise. But the Maple Leafs are one of the most profitable teams in NHL. Why? Because regardless of their success, and they haven't had much success, they have a guaranteed market in Southwest Ontario of 12 million. Soccer, in contrast, in Europe in particular, doesn't have salary caps. They have a system of promotion relegation. And the losing team in the league gets relegated down to the league below. So in the Bundesliga, they go from Bundesliga 1 to Bundesliga 2. And as a consequence, guess what happens? Broadcast rights, which are the foundation of professional sports, also drastically diminish. Media interests drastically diminishes. So the promotion relegation ensures, again, this uncertainty of outcome and perfect competition. And that is important for students to realize that it's not based on monopoly, but it's based upon the league has a monopoly with certain teams, but the teams change year in and year out. So the strongest team from the lower league gets promoted. The other thing why sports are important for business students is the ecosystem of sports and the employment of sports is incredibly complicated. Most people will think of the market for players. The market for players is now a global market due to academies. For example, Beckham, the English former captain, is running academies in China to help President Xi develop this 1 million players by 2030. But the academies are worldwide. So the talent pool is worldwide. So there's the players market. The next important piece is broadcast, media rights. And who controls the media rights? The league. And media is really important. So in the case of the most recent contest between the Toronto Blue Jays and the LA Dodgers, that's interesting because it's the most watched World Series in history. Most watched, not just on TV, but on streaming. It was watched in Japan, Oceania, Africa, through streaming, not through traditional broadcast, but it was the most watched professional baseball game in history. So media is important. As an educator, this case on governance in FIFA is important because students will learn the complex ecosystem of soccer, the growth in professional sports, which is an industry that is growing at 6 to 8% compound per year. It's a multi-billion-dollar business with sports equipment, sports nutrition, Unfortunately, the gambling that goes with it, because that's also a $100 billion industry. Students can learn about how the sports model is different than what they've been exposed to in traditional strategy courses. But it's also important in another way. Students are fascinated with new means of content and content distribution. This case understands how that content distribution is dramatically changing through soccer, and it's leading the way for other professional sports. Another reason that students may be interested in this, particularly finance students, is the role that private equity and sovereign funds are playing in investing. Virtually all the teams in the French League, the Italian League, the Spanish League, and the English League, but not the Bundesliga, are financed by either private equity or sovereign funds. That creates some interesting dilemmas, because for those interested in corporate governance, the only ones that matter in this is not the stakeholders, because private equity is not concerned about the players. It's concerned to grow the fan base, and they do creative things. A stadium, which is an essential element of the ecosystem, is not, as in the United States, financed by state and governments, state and provincial government, is financed often by the club. And so the stadium and enhancing the fans' experience. Some of the stadiums in Europe are so far ahead of what we have at where the Blue Jays play, for example, in terms of the Videotron and engaging fans, and doing that through streaming to fans from Shanghai to Hawaii to Tokyo. The other piece where this is interesting for students is this case, because of its inherent interest in sports. And sports are now not only a growth industry, but interesting to students. This could be positioned early in a course or late in a course. It really doesn't matter, because the case is going to engage students, and cases that are current engage the interest of students, and more importantly, allow them to feel part of the story, are essential parts of good case teaching and case learning. And the lessons will remain with the students after they finish this case. A couple of suggestions for instructors in teaching this case. In terms of your board plan, think about developing the elements of the ecosystem, and throughout the class, go back to the ecosystem of soccer and professional sports. The other piece that I think is important right at the initiation of the class is make sure that students, particularly if it's early in a course, are aware of the elements of Porter's 5 forces and resource dependency theory, and then say, that's all very interesting, but it doesn't apply to professional sports. And then spend some time, if necessary, use one of the YouTube videos, and there's some good ones written up in the teaching note, of what soccer is about. Because depending on your audience, some students will understand soccer, some will not. And so a kind of idiot's guide to soccer may help the students resonate, and maybe even have them address that as part of their learning prep for the class. The thing that I think is the important part of good case teaching is having a clear view of what the student takeaways are. And you board plan, rather than PowerPoint slides, should try and point out what those key learnings are. One is, apart from the Olympic Games, soccer is the most global sport in the world. And it can be played in a backyard in bare feet, or in an organized league at Wembley or at Dortmund Borussia in Germany. So we've got all these levels. And the other piece that's interesting is you need to perhaps make sure in the discussion that learners understand why private equity has become so attracted to professional soccer. The other key takeaway that I think you want to get across is the importance of the sovereign funds, particularly from the Middle East, the Qatar Investment Fund, Emirates Air, Qatar Air, the Saudi's investment fund, who invested heavily, not just in buying teams, but just as importantly, in setting up competitive leagues. And this extends beyond soccer to golf, mixed martial arts, Formula One. That we're seeing a dramatic increase in private equity. The private equity is largely from the United States, specialized investors who are buying big time into these leagues. The industry is evolving. And even though this case is put in 2025, I consider it has a lifespan longer than a traditional timed case. As I view the case, it is relevant, learner-friendly, and it sounds like I'm an expert in soccer. I'm not. My sporting life was mostly around rugby football. But the parallels that rugby football is facing are the parallels that cricket is facing, which is probably the second largest global sport in the world. People don't realize that because every Indian and Pakistani follows the English Premier League. Lots of attention. So it's not just that this is about soccer, which it is, but it's relevant to professional sports. And one of the things that I'm seeing is the role of private equity now investing in women's sports, basketball, volleyball, handball, soccer, rugby, cricket. And that is something that is going to appeal to an audience of today, which is both men and women. And so this is not about just young men running around a soccer field. It's about professional sports and the fact that people want to see a contest. And that's what professional sports gives, provided that the league is well organized and that there's a system of uncertainty of outcome to create perfect competition on any given day.